All right, so in the last video, we saw that we were updating the counter, which is this.counter. It was getting updated, as you can see that we were printing it out right here on the console, and we can see the updated value, but that value was not reflected over here. And the reason is that even though that you are updating the counter and it is getting updated, after performing the update, it is not calling the render function. And when the render function doesn't get called, the new value, the updated value, never gets rendered again. So this means that this technique is not really going to work. We have to use some other technique. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start removing a bunch of this code that we used, which was related to the counter value or the counter property. Okay, so we are now back where we were started. You can see that we have a handle increment click function, which doesn't have anything. So how can we make sure that our data and our user interface is sync, meaning any changes to the data are reflected on the user interface. So as soon as the data changes or updates, the UI also updates. And this is done by something called state. Now, state, the things that you can put into state, you can literally put anything. You will see that it's a simple object. So I'm going to go ahead and create a state variable. This.state equals to an empty object. And it has to be state because this is just like props. This is a property in the component class. So it has to be state. Now, since this is an object, you can put anything in there. So usually you will put something that you want to maintain and you want that thing to be either displayed on the screen or you want that thing to be in sync with the UI. I'm going to go ahead and create a property called counter. And I will assign it 0 value. Now, if I want to get this value to be displayed inside H1, I can simply use the same exact syntax as props, but this time I'm going to use this dot state dot counter. And it actually prints out this 0 value. Now I can go ahead and update this value to 99 just to show you that the value that we are printing out in the heading is actually coming from the state. So there we go. It is actually coming from the state. Now, when we click the button, handle increment click event occurs. So what we want to do is we want to update this counter value, which is now in the state, from 99 to 100. So you might be thinking we can simply do this. This.state.counter plus equals to 1. This just makes sense. But you should never do that. And the reason that you should never do that is that state is immutable. You cannot really change the state. You can replace the whole state, but you cannot change the state. And what we are doing over here is we are changing the state, meaning the state contains a property called counter, and we are changing it by incrementing one more to the existing value of the counter. So we should not do that. And that's a very important concept in React and later on in Redux, where you never really change the value, you always replace the value, or you always replace a state. So how do you replace a state? Well, there is a function called setState. And setState takes in an object. It will always take in an object. And this object, whatever you provide in there, is going to replace the object or the state that you previously had. So in this new object, I want to put the property called counter, and I can put 100. Now, obviously, this is always going to assign 100 no matter how many times I'm clicking on the button, but let's see that if this even works or not. I'm going to go ahead and click on the increment. And now you can see at least it is showing 100. So what actually happened is whenever we call set state, it's going to set the state that happened first, and then it is going to automatically call the render function. And when it calls the render function and we are trying to get the value from the state, we get the updated value, which in this case is 100. Now, it's always going to say 100 because we are hard coding it. We can change this to say this dot state dot counter plus 1. This means that we will get the existing value of the state and then we will add 1 to it. You can see over here that we are not updating the previous state, we are simply replacing the whole state. That's why we have this, you can see right over here, we have this curly braces, which means that this is a new object that will be representing the state, which starts from right here and ends right here. That's the object that we're passing with a property called counter because, well, that was the property that we were using before. I mean, I can go ahead and create some other properties, but we already wrote down the property name in our view or in our render function, so we do want to keep the same name of the property. Then we get the initial or the current state of the counter, which is 99, and we add 1 to it, which making it 100. Next time I'm going to click the button, this.state.counter will be 100 plus 1, 101, and so on. So let's go ahead and click on it, and now you can see that the state is actually getting updated. And we have created a very simple counter application. Now, one thing that you should try out yourself is how would you create the same example that we have just did, the counter example, but with a decrement function, meaning you will have another button over here, which will say, instead of increment, it will say decrement. And when you click on that button, the decrement button, the counter value is going to go down from whatever the initial value is or the current value. So if I had a decrement button right over here, which I don't, but if I did, and I click over here, what will be the next value which will be displayed over here? 145 and 144 and so on. So that's something that you should definitely try it out so that you have an idea of how the state works, how the events work, and you should always set the new state. You should never update the previous state.